All right, well, today I want to talk about lights. Let me get a share screen going. So lights come in a number of different flavors in Unity. We have ambient lights, directional lights, point lights, spotlights, and area lights. An ambient light is kind of non-intuitive in that it doesn't really come from any place. There's no light source. But instead, it's a calculation of what the uniform light that's going every direction in our scene is. So all surfaces are lit exactly the same way by ambient light, and there is no directional term to it. Ambient light, this is a scene that has some ambient light in it. Let me go ahead and play this. The ambient light here is coming from the skybox. I'll show you that in a second. And the skybox has a moving directional light that turns it from daytime to nighttime, and at nighttime the ambient light all goes away. So I do have a directional light in here, but note its intensity is 0. It's not contributing to the scene. A couple of really useful tools to bring in when you're doing lighting. One is the lighting settings window. This has various settings for lighting. And the other is the Light Explorer, which here shows you the lights that I have in my scene. I have this directional and Lerps's jet light. These both come from window pull down, rendering, light settings, and Light Explorer. So in the lighting window, I have the skybox material. This in my scene here is this kind of blue sky. And we'll talk more about the skyboxes later, but the skyboxes are, this skybox, the default skybox, is a procedural calculation of the lighting due in the atmosphere. And so the blue is from scattering, and as the sun gets low in the sky, we end up with sunset kind of colors. And the sun source, the thing that determines the color of that skybox, is this directional light in the scene. Now, the source of this ambient light is the skybox. And we have some choices here. The skybox, which is kind of bluish, is going to give us a sort of bluish tint to our ambient light. But we can also choose a color, in which case the ambient light now is kind of reddish. Or we can choose a gradient, in which case we have a sky color, an equator color, and a ground color. The tops of things will be colored by the sky color, the sides by the equator color, and the bottoms by the ground color. I, of course, like the skybox as a much more interesting color scheme. So that's ambient light. Now, directional lights are lights that do have a directional component. Let me get to a directional scene here. A directional scene. So here's my directional light. And the directional light can be anywhere in the scene. It doesn't matter, because all that matters is the direction of the light. This light is all going in the same direction. And so all of the lighting calculations, all of the shading that goes on here depends just on a single light direction. If I move this light around, nothing changes. However, if I rotate this light, you can see that the direction changes the lighting on the scene. I believe in this scene here, I have a little animator that is going to move my light around and give me a day-night cycle. And here it goes. This is uh, the directional light. And all I'm doing is rotating it around one axis so that I get a day-night cycle. All very cool. Point lights are lights that radiate in all directions from a point. And so if I go to a scene with a point light, there's the point light. Don't save. So here I have a point light, and the point light it is emanating from this spot here in the center. It does matter where it is. If I move the point light around, it definitely matters where it is because the light is coming from that point source. Unlike the directional lights, point lights have a range. So the larger the range, the further the light goes. And when I get to the end of the range, the light intensity is 0. So only stuff inside this sphere around our point light is illuminated by the point light. And the intensity falls off to 0 at the edge of this sphere. A spotlight is kind of a variant of the point light. It also emanates from a particular spot, but it's limited to a cone around the direction that the light is going. So we have this cone of light, and I can make the cone bigger or smaller, and it also has a range beyond which the light intensity is 0. The light within that cone diminishes as it goes out from our cone. Just for fun here, I've put the smooth look at script on this spotlight, and its target is the lerps. And so if I play this scene, my spotlight is going to follow lerps around and keep him in the spotlight. If I go too far, the light attenuates to the point where I can no longer see it. Lerps has a couple of little point lights in his jetpack. So you can see the lights from Lerps's jetpack. They're point lights. Again, reminding you of the Light Explorer. This shows you the characteristics of the lights. We can see some of the properties of the light here in the Light Explorer. Lerps's jet lights are point lights. They're turned off. The spotlight is turned on. They're both real time. Here are their color settings and their intensities. So that's a spotlight. Now, the area light is a little different. The area light, what is the area light? The area light is a little different. Let's see. The area light, first of all, needs to be baked. The area light is a baked only light. And what baking does is it takes in it's a pre-computation that you run before the game is played, and it takes some time. It actually takes 30 seconds to a minute to bake this relatively simple scene. As your scenes get more and more complex, baking can take upwards of half an hour. But baking is it bakes in the light intensity here. So my area light in this case is this little invisible quad here that I've got somewhere up in the sky. And that little quad has a width and a height, 3 by 3. So it's 3 in the red, 3 in the green. Red is X, green is Y. And it emits light in the Z direction. In fact, all lights emit light in the Z direction. So this little panel, which I can also make into a disc, I can have a round light or I can have a rectangular light. Round lights, of course, have a radius. And this light has a color and it has an intensity and it has a range beyond, just like the other lights. And here's my pre-computed light from this little square here. And I can move this thing around and it doesn't make any difference. That's because the light has been baked. The light coloring on this terrain is a result of the baking of the light. And the baking goes forward here in the light window, in the light setting window. We have to have the baked global illumination checked, and we have to generate lighting. I think I've reminded you earlier to turn off the auto generate so that you don't burn a lot of cycles. This is also important when you switch scenes, when you load a scene while the game is playing, it has to have been generated. The generated lighting is also available here. We can see the maps that are made. These are the textures that are laid onto our terrain in order to color it with the light that is coming from this baked area light. The lighting there are 3 different engines that can be used to generate, to bake this. One is Enlighten, which has been deprecated, so we won't use it. And there's a progressive CPU that runs as you would expect in the CPU. And there's a progressive GPU, which is in preview. It's not finalized yet, but it runs in the GPU. And so hopefully it would be a little bit faster. I'm not going to bake this because it takes a certain amount of time, but I will run it and we can have a look at what this light looks like. Pay no attention to the dark shadow under lurps. That's not him. Notice that the dynamic objects like this thing don't have any shadows. That's because they're not light map static, only light map static, which contributes to the GI, are painted with this texture. The nice thing about area lights is that the light comes from many spots on the light, and so our shadows are quite nice and fuzzy and kind of realistic looking. Here's the same scene cooked with the GPU, progressive GPU. It looks pretty much the same. It took a little bit less time to produce. And here it is with a 10 by 10 light. So this is 3 times bigger on each side. So about 9 times as much light is being put into the scene. And that's why it's so completely bright when compared with the little 3 by 3 light that doesn't put as much light into the scene. So those are the different types of lights. Ambient, that is uniform everywhere, has no direction, comes from all directions, everything is lit exactly the same way. The directional light, which only has one direction, all the light is coming from in the same direction. The point lights that radiate, the spotlights that radiate but have a cone, and this magical area light that is a panel that emits in the Z direction and must be baked. I mentioned the light setting and light explorer windows that you can use. So all of it, as you've seen, our lights all have intensity and color. We can set the color of our different lights. We can set their intensities. Some of them, like the spotlight and the point light and the area light, have ranges, distances beyond which the light attenuates to zero. A cookie is something that you put over the front, usually of a spotlight. You can do it with the other lights, but it doesn't make as much sense. Don't save. But with a spotlight here, I can put a cookie on it. I can put a cookie on it. Whoops. Cookies are special textures that you can put on them. Here's a flashlight cookie. Here's another flashlight cookie. So these are kind of like things that you're putting over the end of the spotlight that make the light look a little different. I don't know why that one doesn't work. But these are cookies. You can put cookies on the other lights, but it doesn't make any sense. The render mode is either forward or deferred. This has stuff to do with what goes on in the GPU and how fancy the calculation is. Forward is less expensive than deferred. We have the culling mask, which is similar to the culling mask on the camera that affects what layers the light interacts with. We can put a halo around our light, and we can also put a flare on our light. I want to show you the shadows here a little bit. So let's go back into this camera scene and zoom down in on lerps and kind of get to where we can look at him. And I'm going to turn the light down to a lower angle so that we have a nice long shadow here. Turn it down to 35, 30. Okay. Now, I also want to turn off something that I'll talk about later, this blob shadow projector. And the shadows are turned on the lights. So here I've turned off the shadows. So there are no shadows being cast by our objects. And shadows come in two different varieties: hard shadows, and soft shadows. Now, shadows also come with a strength. So if I turn this up to 1, the shadow gets very dark. If I turn it down, the shadow gets less dark. Somewhere around 0.5 is not bad. And shadows have a resolution. So here in my scene, I have this low resolution shadow, and it's kind of fuzzy. And if I go to a medium resolution, it gets sharper, high resolution, and very high resolution. And of course, as with anything in computers, the better you want it, the more cycles it costs to render it. So low resolution is actually not bad. It makes a kind of fuzzy shadow that looks fairly realistic. With soft shadows again have this darkness. So a low resolution soft shadow is quite fuzzy. And as I go up to higher resolution or very high resolution, the soft shadows also become crisper. But the edges of it are a little fuzzy, which mimics the effect of a distributed source. Light doesn't really come from a point. It comes from an area of the light, and these shadows reflect that. So shadows being cast by the light are very interesting and give a real sense of three-dimensionality to our lights. So I mentioned point and spot have the range, area has a range, spotlight has an angle, and there's one other source of light that actually isn't a light, it's an emissive material, a material that emits light. And with emissive materials, we have a choice of either baking them, in which case they're static, or making them real time, in which case we can actually vary them and they'll look different as something changes. So here's an illuminated objects. Don't save. Here's illuminated objects. So I've got uh, a white panel here that has a material on it, glowing white, that has the emission checked. So it's emitting light. This is the color that it's emitting. And it's a real time. It could be baked or none, in which case it would look like it was lit, but it wouldn't be contributing any light to the scene. Real time has to be baked as well. And for real time, I have to remember to turn on real time lighting here. So this little check mark here, and of course, generate the lighting. The red cube here has a material glowing red, but it also has an animator on it with an animator that's going to vary the color. And I think it's basically going to vary it from red down to black and then back through yellow again. So let's have a look at this. So there's my varying emissive light. This one over here is kind of static. It's casting light. And notice there's no shadow for the ball. These kind of lights don't make shadows. Over here, LURPS is being illuminated by the light. Now, to do this, I had to do a trick because LURPS is not light map static. You can't move something that is light map static. So if I want LURPS to be able to move around, if I want the ball to be able to bounce, neither of them can be light map static. And if they're not light map static, this is what the scene looks like. LURPS and the ball are not illuminated by these flickering lights, by these emissive materials. And the way one gets it to look like this is by adding something called light probes. And light probes are little spots that you put around in your scene. And when you bake it, the light intensity at that point is captured by the light probe. And then these dynamic objects, as they move around, can get what the color light is from the nearest light probe, the nearest spot where the light has been measured. And the light probes look like this in the scene. There are a whole bunch of different spots that I've put around the scene to capture the light when it is baked. And then as I move around inside that mesh of light probes, the light on the dynamic objects is adjusted to make it look like it's getting light from the glowing objects. So I'm going to stop there. I'll stop sharing here and I'll end recording. So I'll see you all in class. Bye.